The Mekong River is a lifeline that courses through the heart of Southeast Asia, a mighty serpent of water and history stretching over 4,300 kilometers. For Cambodia, the river is more than a source of sustenance. Its waters hold stories as deep as their currents, legends whispered through generations, and secrets lurking beneath its serene surface. As twilight descends, the Mekong takes on an otherworldly aura. Shadows from the dense, ancient forests dance across its rippling waters. The golden glow of the setting sun fades into deep indigo, and the sounds of the jungle begin their nightly symphony. Yet amidst this beauty lies an unsettling stillness, a quiet forewarning for those who dare disturb the sacred balance of the river. For the people of Cambodia, the Mekong is sacred, revered as a gateway between the physical world and the spiritual. Fishermen lower their nets with silent prayers, seeking permission from the river spirits before casting their lines. Monks offer lotus blossoms at its banks, their chants drifting across the water like an ethereal melody. Travelers and locals alike speak in hushed tones about the river's power, both to nourish and to punish. But not all who visit the Mekong heed these traditions. For some, the river is just another natural wonder, its spiritual significance lost amid the pursuit of adventure or profit. These are the ones who often meet an untimely fate, their cries swallowed by the darkness, their names added to the growing list of souls claimed by the water ghosts of Cambodia. Legend has it that these ghosts are the restless spirits of those who drowned in the Mekong, victims of accidents, despair, or vengeance. Some say they were once wrongdoers who disrespected the river's sacred waters. Others whisper of ancient rituals, where sacrifices were made to appease the river gods. Regardless of their origins, the water ghosts are said to emerge under the cover of night, their translucent forms rising silently from the depths. They are not seen by all. Only those who offend the river's sanctity can glimpse their pale faces, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. To cross their path is to invite a chilling fate, one that ensures their victims will never again feel the warmth of the sun. Before we delve deeper into the eerie encounters and chilling tales, let me take a moment to remind you that stories like these come alive because of your support. If you're captivated by the mysteries we unravel here, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It not only helps us bring more spine-tingling tales to you, but also ensures you never miss a moment of the thrill. So, join our growing community of seekers and believers, because you never know when you might stumble upon a story that lingers long after the screen goes dark. Now let us return to the Mekong. The locals tell of an unspoken rule: never stand too close to the water's edge at night. They say the spirits are drawn to the reckless, the curious, and the defiant. The warnings are not meant to scare but to protect, for the river has eyes where no one dares to look. On quiet nights, villagers claim they hear faint whispers, voices carried by the wind but too close to be natural. Others speak of ghostly hands that reach out from the water, cold and unyielding, dragging their victims into the depths. Yet, the most chilling tales are of those who return, those who escape the clutches of the water ghosts only to find themselves forever haunted, marked by the river's wrath. And so, as you stand on the banks of the Mekong, its dark waters flowing endlessly before you, one question remains: will you honor its sacred traditions, or will you risk awakening the restless spirits that lie beneath? The Mekong River is more than a vast, flowing lifeline. It is a silent witness to centuries of human triumphs and tragedies, its waters steeped in myth and mystery. For as long as anyone can remember, the locals have whispered tales of the water ghosts, ethereal guardians who rise from the depths to enforce the river's sacred laws. According to legend, the water ghosts are the souls of those who perished in the Mekong. Some were victims of misfortune: fishermen caught in sudden storms, travelers who lost their footing, or children swept away by the river's strong undercurrents. Others, it is said, met darker fates. In ancient times, when the Mekong's waters were thought to be alive with divine power, rituals were performed to appease the river's spirits. These rituals often demanded offerings, sometimes of livestock, sometimes of gold, and in the most desperate of circumstances, human lives. The spirits of these sacrifices are said to have merged with the river itself, becoming protectors of its sanctity. But their protection is not benevolent. They are restless and vengeful, drawn to those who violate the unspoken rules that govern the Mekong. To pollute its waters, to take from it without gratitude, or to mock its traditions is to invite the wrath of the water ghosts. These spirits do not forgive easily. Witnesses speak of spectral figures rising silently from the river, their forms translucent and shimmering like moonlight on water. Some appear as they were in life, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or sorrow. Others are grotesque, their features distorted as if still drowning in the river's embrace. But all who have seen them agree on one thing: the water ghosts radiate an unnatural cold that chills to the bone, a cold that lingers long after they disappear. The punishments they mete out are as varied as the offenses committed. For some, it begins with a haunting, a persistent sense of being watched, whispers in the night, or dreams of being pulled underwater. For others, the consequences are more immediate and fatal. Boats capsize without warning, swimmers are dragged under by invisible hands. Even the most experienced fishermen find their nets torn and empty. One of the most chilling tales is that of a foreign merchant who arrived in Cambodia centuries ago, eager to exploit the Mekong's resources. He dismissed the locals' warnings as superstitious nonsense and began dredging the river for gold. His work disturbed the riverbed, and with it, the spirits who rested there. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. His workers disappeared one by one, leaving only faint ripples on the water's surface. One night, the merchant himself vanished. His boat was found the next morning, empty save for a single gold coin, wet and cold to the touch. The story serves as a grim reminder: the water ghosts protect the Mekong with a fierce, unyielding devotion. To them, the river is sacred ground, a boundary between worlds that must not be crossed lightly. But there is another side to the legend, a faint glimmer of hope for those who find themselves at the mercy of these spirits. The locals believe that the water ghosts can be appeased through acts of respect and reverence. Offerings of flowers or food, prayers spoken softly at the water's edge, and genuine remorse can sometimes sway the spirits to show mercy. Yet even this is no guarantee. The ghost's judgment is final, and their rules are unyielding. The question that remains is haunting. Are the water ghosts malevolent entities, seeking vengeance for their tragic ends, or are they misunderstood guardians, protecting the Mekong from the recklessness of humanity? As you listen to these tales, remember that every legend has its roots in truth. The next time you find yourself near the Mekong's dark waters, tread carefully. The river is watching, and its ghosts never sleep. For Daniel Sullivan, the Mekong River was a challenge waiting to be conquered. A seasoned travel writer with a reputation for debunking myths and exploring uncharted territories, Daniel prided himself on seeing through superstition and finding the truth hidden behind folklore. Cambodia was his latest assignment, and the Mekong, a river steeped in legend and reverence, was his focus. His journey began like most others, with excitement and curiosity. Daniel had heard the stories, of course. The locals spoke of the water ghosts in hushed voices, their warnings coated with an air of solemnity. They told him not to disrespect the river, not to take its waters lightly, and certainly not to wander too close after dark. But Daniel, with his notebook in hand and his camera slung over his shoulder, dismissed these tales as remnants of an older time, relics of a culture steeped in mysticism. For him, the Mekong was a goldmine of content. Its winding currents and sprawling banks held stories of survival, of commerce, of a civilization shaped by its waters. The idea of vengeful spirits guarding the river seemed like a charming exaggeration, a tale to entertain children or warn the foolhardy. Daniel wasn't here to play into local superstitions. He was here to capture the essence of the river, its raw beauty and undeniable power, for an audience hungry for adventure. The first few days of his journey were uneventful. He traveled by boat, guided by a local ferryman named Chan, who seemed wary of his passengers' skepticism. "The Mekong is alive," Chan said one evening as the boat drifted in the calm waters. "It sees you, knows you. Respect it or it will take you." Daniel laughed, brushing off the warning. "I've been to places like this before," he said. "Every river, every forest, every mountain has its legends. They're fascinating, sure, but they're just stories." Chan's expression darkened. "You shouldn't laugh at things you don't understand," he muttered, turning his gaze to the horizon. But Daniel was too caught up in his plans to notice the unease creeping into the air. His days were filled with capturing the river's splendor, photographing its sunsets, and interviewing locals about its history. Yet, despite his focus, something strange began to happen. It started small, a faint sound of whispers carried on the wind, just barely audible over the gentle lapping of the water. At first, Daniel thought it was his imagination, the product of long hours in the sun. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were following him. Then there were the shadows, faint, fleeting shapes that seemed to dart beneath the surface of the water, vanishing as soon as he tried to focus on them. By the time he reached a secluded stretch of the Mekong known for its beauty and its rumored hauntings, Daniel's confidence had begun to waver. The villagers there were less welcoming, their warnings more direct. "Don't stay by the water after dark," one woman said, her voice trembling. "They'll see you." "They?" Daniel asked, his curiosity piqued. "The spirits," she replied. "The ones who never left." That night, Daniel decided to stay by the riverbank, determined to prove the stories wrong. Armed with his camera and a notebook, he waited, his skepticism shielding him from the creeping sense of dread that had settled over the area. The air grew colder, the once comforting sounds of the jungle falling into an eerie silence. As the moon climbed higher, Daniel saw something that made his breath catch, a faint, glowing figure rising from the water. Its features were indistinct, its form shimmering like a reflection on a disturbed surface. The whispers returned, louder now, forming words he couldn't understand. For the first time, Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The legend of the water ghost was no longer just a story. As Daniel Sullivan pressed deeper into his exploration of the Mekong River, his determination to uncover its secrets began to border on arrogance. For days, he had ignored the villagers' warnings and dismissed the stories of the water ghosts as the byproduct of an overactive imagination fueled by superstition. But the Mekong, it seemed, had other plans. The day started innocuously enough. Daniel had decided to venture further upriver, away from the villages and into a more remote stretch of the Mekong, untouched by modernity. His guide, Chan, was reluctant to go. "This part of the river," Chan warned, "is not for outsiders. Many have gone there and never come back." Undeterred, Daniel insisted. "If there's a story to be found," he said, "it's here. You can drop me off and wait if you're too scared." Reluctantly, Chan complied, leaving Daniel on the riverbank with his gear. The lush jungle pressed in around him, the only sounds the rhythmic lapping of the water and the distant calls of unseen birds. But as the day wore on, something began to feel wrong. It started with the whispers. Daniel first noticed them while setting up his camera by the water's edge. Faint and fleeting, they seemed to come from the river itself, overlapping voices that he couldn't quite understand. He paused, straining to listen, but the whispers faded into the ambient hum of the jungle. Shaking it off as his mind playing tricks on him, Daniel pressed on. He was determined to capture footage of the river's natural beauty for his article. But as the afternoon sun began to wane, his actions took a careless turn. While moving his equipment, Daniel accidentally dropped a plastic water bottle into the river. He reached to retrieve it, but the current quickly carried it away. "It's just one bottle," he muttered, brushing off the mistake. But in the back of his mind, Chan's words lingered, "Respect the river." Later, in search of a better vantage point, Daniel disturbed a small shrine tucked near the riverbank. It was simple, a pile of stones adorned with offerings of flowers, incense, and small trinkets. Without thinking, Daniel moved the stones to make room for his tripod, inadvertently scattering the offerings. As the last rays of sunlight vanished, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy and still, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath. The whispers returned, louder now, interspersed with an unsettling gurgling sound, like something bubbling up from the depths of the river. Daniel began to feel uneasy, though he told himself it was just the isolation playing tricks on him. He focused on his work, ignoring the growing sense that he was not alone. But the signs became impossible to dismiss. The river, once calm and steady, began to ripple unnaturally. Shadows darted beneath the surface, too large and swift to be fish. The jungle, alive with sound just moments ago, fell silent, save for the persistent whispers that now seemed to come from every direction. Then came the chill. A sudden, bone-deep cold swept over Daniel, sending shivers down his spine despite the humid air. He glanced at the river and froze. The water, illuminated by the pale light of the moon, seemed to shimmer unnaturally. For the first time, Daniel felt genuine fear. He packed his gear hastily, ready to call for Chan, but as he turned to leave, he saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the water. It was faint, translucent, and unmoving, its gaze fixed directly on him. The whispers grew louder, the voices overlapping into a cacophony that filled his ears and made his head spin. Daniel stumbled back, his heart pounding as he realized the figure was not alone. More shapes began to emerge from the water, their forms flickering like reflections on a disturbed surface. The Mekong, it seemed, was demanding retribution. Daniel's hurried steps echoed through the dense silence of the jungle as he tried to distance himself from the river. The haunting image of the ghostly figures rising from the water was etched into his mind. He could still hear the whispers, faint yet unrelenting, as though they had seeped into his very being. His fingers trembled as he fumbled for his radio to call Chan, but the static-filled device offered no response. "Chan, pick up," he muttered, his voice cracking with panic. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the whispers. Night had fully descended now, and the jungle was bathed in the silvery glow of the moon. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but it seemed weaker than it should have been, as if the shadows were resisting the light. He told himself he just needed to get back to the drop-off point where Chan had promised to wait. But as he pressed on, the river's presence became inescapable. Despite walking inland, the sound of water lapping against the shore followed him. He glanced over his shoulder and froze. A dark, reflective patch shimmered a few meters behind him, a pool of water that hadn't been there before. His breath quickened. "It's just my mind playing tricks," he whispered, trying to convince himself, but deep down he knew better. The whispers began to grow louder. They no longer seemed random but purposeful, almost conversational. It felt as though unseen beings were speaking about him, deciding his fate. Then came the laughter, soft, mocking, and distinctly human, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Daniel spun around, his flashlight beam darting through the trees. There was nothing there, but the laughter didn't stop. It echoed in his ears, chilling and relentless, as if it came from both within him and all around. He broke into a sprint, his boots pounding against the damp ground. The path seemed unfamiliar now, twisting and turning in ways it hadn't before. The jungle had become a labyrinth, and the air felt heavier with every step. His pulse pounded in his ears as the whispers turned to hissing, like water boiling over in an unseen cauldron. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. Flickering figures emerged from the shadows, their translucent forms barely distinguishable from the mist rising off the river. They moved slowly, almost languidly, but their intent was clear. They were following him. One figure stood out among them, a woman with long, flowing hair that rippled as if submerged in water. Her face was obscured, but her presence was commanding, and the temperature around Daniel plummeted. He felt his limbs grow heavy, as though unseen hands were dragging him back toward the river. "No," he gasped, forcing himself to keep moving. But with every step forward, the ground beneath him grew softer, wetter, until he realized he was walking on mud. He looked down in horror to see water pooling around his feet, creeping up his ankles as if alive. The laughter returned, louder this time, and Daniel finally understood. He wasn't just being followed. He was being lured. The river wanted him back. Panicking, he tried to run, but the water clung to him, its grip tightening with every step. The figures grew closer, their movements synchronizing like a haunting dance. The woman raised an arm, pointing directly at him, and the whispers coalesced into a single chilling word: return. Daniel fell to his knees, the weight of the water too much to bear. His camera tumbled from his grasp, sinking into the muddy ground. As he struggled to rise, he felt a hand, cold, clammy, and impossibly strong, grip his shoulder. He screamed, a sound swallowed by the jungle and the river's relentless whispers. Daniel's scream echoed through the jungle, but there was no one to hear it. The icy hand gripping his shoulder tightened, pulling him back toward the water. His legs were submerged now, the muddy riverbed clinging to him like quicksand. Desperation took over as he thrashed against the invisible force, his hands clawing at the ground. "Please," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean any harm." The whispers rose again, overlapping and incomprehensible, their intensity shaking his resolve. The spectral woman hovered closer, her translucent form now illuminated by an ethereal glow. Her face remained hidden, but her sorrow was palpable, radiating in waves that chilled Daniel to the bone. Summoning all his strength, he broke free from the icy grip and stumbled forward, tripping over tree roots as he ran blindly through the jungle. The river seemed to follow him, the sound of rushing water never far behind. Each step was a battle against the oppressive pull of the spirits, who seemed intent on dragging him back. It was then that Daniel remembered Chan's words: "If you ever find yourself in trouble, show respect to the river. Offer something of value. Seek forgiveness." Clutching at this faint hope, Daniel rummaged through his pockets. His fingers closed around the small pendant his mother had given him, a silver amulet shaped like a lotus flower. It was the only thing of sentimental value he had with him, a talisman of protection she insisted he always carry. "Let this be enough," he whispered, his voice trembling. Spotting a large, moss-covered rock that seemed to resemble an altar, Daniel approached it cautiously. The jungle around him was eerily silent now, as if the spirits were watching, waiting. He knelt before the rock, placing the pendant on its surface. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't understand. I disrespected your river, your home. Please take this as my apology." For a moment, nothing happened. The air remained thick and heavy, and the whispers began to rise again, this time more insistent. Doubt crept into Daniel's mind. Had he waited too long? Was his offering insufficient? Then the woman appeared again, her form rising from the river like mist. This time she was not alone. A host of spirits emerged with her, their expressions unreadable but their presence overwhelming. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched the woman approach the makeshift altar. She extended a hand, ghostly fingers brushing the pendant. The jungle seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. The whispers stopped. The woman turned her face toward him, and for the first time Daniel saw her eyes, piercing, sorrowful, and impossibly deep. They spoke volumes without words, a silent communication that pierced his soul. He understood then, the spirits were not merely vengeful. They were guardians, bound to the river by ancient pain and duty, protecting its sanctity from those who would harm it. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he bowed his head. "I promise to honor your river. I'll tell your story so others will understand." The woman tilted her head slightly as if acknowledging his pledge. Slowly the spirits began to recede, their forms dissolving into the mist. The jungle came alive once more with the sounds of chirping insects and rustling leaves. Daniel looked around, his breath shaky but steady. The river, once menacing, now seemed calm and serene, its surface shimmering in the moonlight. He retrieved his camera, muddy but intact, and began the slow journey back to the drop-off point. When he finally reached Chan, the guide's face was pale with worry. "You look like you've seen the water ghosts," Chan said softly. Daniel met his gaze, his voice steady but haunted. "I have. And they let me go." The dawn broke over the Mekong River, painting the water in hues of gold and crimson. Daniel sat on the riverbank, staring at the gentle ripples as if they held the secrets of the universe. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind, a haunting loop of whispers, spectral forms, and an overwhelming sense of otherworldly judgment. Chan knelt beside him, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced with somber curiosity. "You survived," he said, almost in disbelief. Daniel nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "They spared me." The guide's gaze shifted to the river. "You're lucky. Many aren't. The water ghosts don't forgive easily." Daniel didn't feel lucky. He felt changed. The camera in his lap, once his prized possession, now felt like a burden. It contained images he wasn't sure he wanted to see, let alone share. He knew he couldn't erase what had happened, but the thought of exploiting it felt like another violation of the river's sanctity. "I need to leave this place," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "But not before I make things right." Chan tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "I'll write about this," Daniel replied, his determination growing. "Not for fame or recognition, but to warn others. People need to know what this river is, what it represents. If they come here, they must respect it." Chan nodded approvingly. "That's wise. But be careful. Some stories are better left untold." As Daniel packed his belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every ripple in the water, sent chills down his spine. The spirits might have spared him, but he knew they hadn't forgotten. Back in the city, Daniel began to process his experience. He sifted through his camera's footage, each image pulling him deeper into the memory of that night. Most of the photos were distorted, marred by an unnatural blur that seemed to ripple like water. Only one image was clear, the face of the spectral woman, her sorrowful eyes staring directly into the lens. He couldn't explain how the image had been captured or why it was the only one untainted. It was as if she had chosen to leave him a message, a reminder of their encounter. The photo became a focal point of his writing, a haunting visual that accompanied his warnings about respecting the Mekong River. Months later, Daniel's account was published. It circulated widely, sparking debates about superstition, respect for local traditions, and the fine line between skepticism and belief. Many dismissed his story as a fabrication, but others, a surprising number, shared their own eerie encounters with the river, adding layers to the legend of the water ghosts. Despite the attention his story received, Daniel remained uneasy. The memory of the spectral woman's eyes haunted him, especially when he ventured near water. Every stream, lake, or fountain seemed to carry an echo of the Mekong, a reminder of his transgression and the spirit's mercy. One night, Daniel dreamt of the river again. In the dream, he stood at its edge, the water unnaturally still. The spectral woman appeared, her form shimmering like moonlight. She didn't speak, but her eyes conveyed a message he couldn't ignore. Respect is not a one-time act. It's a lifetime commitment. When Daniel woke, he knew his journey with the Mekong wasn't truly over. He began to advocate for environmental conservation, using his platform to protect sacred waterways and educate others about the importance of cultural respect. But even as he dedicated himself to this mission, a lingering question remained. Had the water ghosts truly forgiven him, or were they simply waiting? As the audience ponders Daniel's fate, they're left with an unsettling truth. Some places are not merely destinations, they are alive, bound by ancient forces that demand reverence. And those who forget this may find themselves entangled in a haunting they can never escape.